Are you ready for a gripping tale of courage, science, and the power of human resilience? Join us on Midnight Murmurs as we delve into a futuristic world of a woman with red eyes and black hair, a doctor on a mission to save her city, and the race against time to find a cure. Don't forget to like and subscribe to stay up to date with our latest videos. Chapter 1: The Diagnosis. Dr. Ava sat in her office, looking over the data on her iPad. She was a talented medic, one of the finest in the city, and her patients admired her for her ability to identify and treat even the most difficult medical disorders. She had seen it all, from uncommon diseases to serious traumas, but there was something about the newest surge of afflictions that had her intrigued. Patients were arriving with unusual symptoms that she had never seen before. They had red eyes, black bags beneath them, and a persistent cough that no treatment seemed to relieve. At first, she had assumed it was a new virus that had appeared in the city, but as more and more people came in, she began to fear that it was something else completely. Dr. Ava sat back in her chair, scratching her temples. She needed to know out what was causing this disease before it went any further. She took up her phone and contacted her colleague, Dr. Jones. "Hey, it's Ava. Listen, I need your aid. Have you encountered any patients with strange symptoms lately?" Dr. Jones said, "Yes, I have. They have a chronic cough, red eyes, and dark circles. I've tried everything, but nothing seems to work." Dr. Ava agreed, "I've been noticing the same thing. We need to investigate this." Dr. Jones said, "I'll meet you in the lab in an hour. We can start performing some tests." As Dr. Ava hung up the phone, she couldn't help but feel a sense of exhilaration. She enjoyed a good medical mystery, and this was turning out to be a hard one. At the lab, Dr. Ava and Dr. Jones worked together to analyze the patient samples. They did test after test, but nothing appeared to give a conclusive answer. Dr. Ava felt a sensation of frustration growing up inside her. She couldn't comprehend why the sickness was so resistant to therapy. As they continued their study, Dr. Ava observed something peculiar in the samples. There was a peculiar chemical that she couldn't recognize. She summoned over Dr. Jones to have a look. "Have you seen this before?" Dr. Ava inquired. Dr. Jones shook his head. "No, I haven't. This is something new." Dr. Ava's thoughts raced as she sought to figure out what the chemical may be. It wasn't a virus or bacteria, and it didn't match any known material in their database. As they proceeded to scrutinize the samples, Dr. Ava couldn't help but get a sense of foreboding. This sickness was unlike anything she had ever seen before. She realized they needed to find a treatment immediately before it spread any further. The two physicians labored into the night, determined to find a solution. As they worked, they cobbled together a terrible theory. The sickness looked to be purposely created, meant to avoid their medicines and infect as many individuals as possible. Dr. Ava felt a shudder go down her spine as she contemplated the ramifications of their results. Who would do such a thing, and why? As the dawn began to rise, the two physicians finally located a lead. The unusual material they had uncovered was an artificial concoction meant to target the immune system. They knew that they needed to investigate further to determine who was responsible for creating it and why. Dr. Ava had an overwhelming sense of relief as they made progress, but she realized that they had just scraped the surface of this riddle. She couldn't avoid the sensation that they were dealing with something considerably more substantial than a simple medical problem. As she left the lab and made her way back to her office, Dr. Ava felt a new sense of purpose. She understood that she needed to discover a solution for this sickness and expose the individuals behind it. The city's population was in danger, and she was determined to protect them. Over the following 3 days, Dr. Ava worked diligently, attempting numerous treatments and therapies to find what worked best against the manufactured material. She was careful not to let anyone know what they were dealing with, as she didn't want to generate a panic. As more and more patients came in, Dr. Ava began to feel a feeling of urgency. She understood that time was running out, and they needed to find a treatment before it was too late. She devoted all her mind and energy into her work, rarely taking breaks or even resting. Dr. Ava's colleagues began to observe the toll the sickness was having on her. She looked pale and fatigued, and her eyes had heavy bags under them. They urged that she take a break and relax, but she refused. She knew that she couldn't stop until they found a cure. One night, when Dr. Ava was working in the lab, she had an unexpected visitor. It was a man she had never seen before, wearing a suit and holding a briefcase. He identified himself as a representative of the city's government. "Dr. Ava, we need to talk," he remarked, his tone intense. Dr. Ava scowled. "What is this about?" The man opened his briefcase and brought out a file. "We've been monitoring your progress, and we think we know what's causing the illness." Dr. Ava's eyes widened. "You do?" The guy nodded. "It's a biological weapon, created by a group of rebels who are trying to overthrow the government." Dr. Ava felt her heart fall. This was worse than she had imagined. If what the man stated was accurate, then the city was in far greater danger than they had imagined. "What can I do to help?" she said, ready to do whatever it needed to stop the rebels. The guy gave her the paperwork. "We need you to help us discover a cure. You're the only one who can accomplish it." Dr. Ava took the paperwork and reviewed it attentively. It included information on the rebels, their objectives, and the biological weapon they had produced. She felt a feeling of purpose, knowing that she had to stop them and preserve the city. Over the following 3 weeks, Dr. Ava worked diligently, examining the material in the dossier and conducting tests to develop a cure for the biological weapon. She worked closely with the government, sharing her discoveries and cooperating with other physicians and experts. Finally, after weeks of hard labor, Dr. Ava found a solution. She and her colleagues devised a serum that neutralized the weapon and healed the patients. They disseminated the serum to every hospital and clinic in the city, guaranteeing that everyone was protected. As the city steadily rebuilt, Dr. Ava felt a feeling of relief and pride. She had worked hard to locate the remedy, and now the residents of the city could rest comfortably, knowing that they were secure. She knew that the rebels were still out there, but she was determined to keep working until they were brought to justice. The encounter has transformed Dr. Ava. She had always been committed to her profession, but now she understood the value of it in a whole new light. She realized that she had the capacity to save lives, and she was determined to do it every day. Chapter 2: The Escape. Dr. Ava has always been skilled at maintaining a level head. As a doctor, she had to be. But when she found the truth about the mystery sickness that was afflicting the city, it was all she could do to stay from panicking. She realized she had to leave and warn others before it was too late. She immediately packed her belongings and snuck out of the hospital where she worked, making her way towards the outskirts of the city. She had heard reports of an underground network of rebels who were fighting against the repressive government, and she believed they could aid her. As she strolled, she soaked in the sights and sounds of the city around her. The skyscrapers towered high above her, shining in the harsh light of the sun. People ran by her, their features covered in a mix of fear and resignation. This was a city that had long since given up on hope. Finally, after what felt like hours of trekking, she reached the outskirts of the city. The air was fresher out here, but the buildings were much more decrepit and the inhabitants seemed even more forlorn. Dr. Ava hesitated, unsure of where to proceed next. That's when she heard a voice behind her. "You look lost. Document." She turned to find a lady standing behind her, her black hair drawn back in a tight bun. Her eyes were vivid green and she wore a leather jacket over a basic white t-shirt. Dr. Ava pondered for a bit before speaking. "I'm looking for someone who can help me." The woman raised an eyebrow. "Oh. And who may that be?" Dr. Ava took a big breath. "I need to find the rebels. I know information that might aid them in their struggle." The woman grinned. "Well, you've come to the correct location. My name is Lily and I'm part of the underground network. Follow me." Dr. Ava followed Lily through the twisting lanes of the outskirts until they came to a rundown building. Lily pushed open the door and signaled for Dr. Ava to follow her inside. Inside, Dr. Ava found herself in a dimly lit room crowded with individuals. They all turned to stare at her as she arrived. Lily stepped forward. "This is Dr. Ava. She has knowledge on the disease that's been spreading around the city. We need to hear what she has to say." Dr. Ava took a deep breath and proceeded to relate her story. She informed them about the weird sickness that had been afflicting people, about how she had learned that it was planned and had been developed by the government, She informed them about the experiments she had uncovered and the individuals she had seen die. The room was hushed as she spoke. When she was finished, there was a long wait until someone finally spoke out. "We've known for a long time that something like this was happening," a guy stated. "But we never have any proof. This alters everything." Dr. Ava felt a sense of relief rush over her. She had discovered the rebels and they believed her. But then she heard footsteps outside the door and her sense of relief changed to terror. "Quick, we need to leave," Lily cried, grasping Dr. Ava's arm. "They must have followed you here." The gang raced out of the building and into the streets. Dr. Ava could hear the sound of boots thumping on pavement behind them. She forced herself to run faster, her heart beating in her chest. They sprinted for what felt like hours until they eventually found a concealed subterranean bunker. Once inside, Dr. Ava slumped on the floor, gasping for air. Lily knelt down beside her. "You did excellent, document. You're secure now." Dr. Ava nodded, still trying to catch her breath. She looked around the bunker, taking in her surroundings. It was a cramped space, with a few cots pushed against the walls and a small kitchen area in the corner. It was evident that the individuals who lived here were living in severe conditions. As Dr. Ava caught her breath, Lily and the others began to discuss what they should do next. They all agreed that the information Dr. Ava had brought them was invaluable, but they needed to be careful about how they used it. The government was not to be underestimated, and they needed to plan their next move carefully. Dr. Ava listened closely as they spoke, impressed by their brilliance and strategic thinking. These were people who had clearly been fighting against the government for a long time, and they knew what they were doing. As the conversation continued, Dr. Ava found herself feeling more and more at ease. These people were risking their lives to fight for what they believed in, and she was honored to be a part of it. Over the next few days, Dr. Ava settled into life in the bunker. She helped tend to the sick and injured and worked with the rebels to come up with a plan to stop the government's experimentation. She felt more alive than she had in years, and she knew that this was where she was meant to be. But she couldn't help but worry about what would happen if they were caught. The administration was vicious, and they would stop at nothing to quiet anybody who resisted them. One night, Dr. Ava lay awake in her cot, unable to sleep. She could hear the quiet breathing of the people around her and the distant buzz of the metropolis above. She understood that there was no going back now. She had taken a position against the administration, and she had to see it through to the finish. As she lay there, lost in meditation, she suddenly felt a touch on her shoulder. She turned to see Lily standing behind her cot, her green eyes gleaming in the faint light. "Hey," Lily murmured gently. "You okay?" Dr. Ava nodded. "Just a lot to think about." Lily sat down on the side of the cot. "I know it's daunting, but we're in this together. We'll get through it." Dr. Ava smiled, appreciative for the support. Thank you. I don't know what I would do without all of you. Lily grinned. We've got your back, document always. As Dr. Ava sank back into her cot, she realized that she had found a home among these rebels. They were fighting for a better world, and she felt delighted to be a part of it. Chapter 3: The Underground. Dr. Ava made her way through the congested streets of the futuristic metropolis, her crimson eyes examining the faces of the people around her. She had never felt totally at home in this city, with its dazzling buildings and soaring towers. It was a country where the affluent and strong held influence, while the regular people fought to exist. As a doctor, Ava had witnessed firsthand the toll that this metropolis had on its citizens. She has treated many people with injuries and diseases caused by the difficult living circumstances and the dirty air. But now, she had come into something much more frightening. It had began with a few cases of a mystery sickness that had been ravaging the city. Ava had been brought in to assist identify the patients, but the symptoms were unlike anything she had ever seen. It was as if the sickness had been purposefully manufactured, with no known treatment. As she investigated deeper, Ava had learned that the government was participating in a plot to hide up the underlying origin of the sickness. She knew she couldn't trust anyone in the city, not even her colleagues at the hospital. She had to recruit supporters, individuals who were willing to battle against the corrupt administration and reveal the truth. That was why she found herself in the underground tunnels under the city, searching for the rebels who were fighting against the government. The tunnels were dark and wet, with a musty scent that made her nose twitch. She could hear the sound of trickling water and muffled voices in the distance. Ava's eyes acclimated to the darkness as she made her way through the maze of tunnels. She noticed individuals gathering in tiny groups, chatting and exchanging information. Some of them looked up as she went by, their eyes widening at the sight of a doctor in their midst. Finally, she got to a tiny room where a handful of rebels were gathering. They were a motley group, with varied backgrounds and vocations. There was a hacker with wild hair and a pierced nose, a mechanic with oil-stained hands, and a former soldier with scars on his face. Ava introduced herself and described her circumstances. She informed them about the odd sickness and the government's role in the cover-up. The rebels listened closely, nodding their heads as she talked. When she ended, there was a moment of stillness. Then, the hacker spoke out. "We've heard rumors about this illness," she remarked. "We assumed the government was involved, but we didn't have any proof. If what you're saying is accurate, then we need to move swiftly." The mechanic chimed in. "But how do we know we can trust her?" he questioned, looking towards Ava. "She could be working for the government, trying to lure us into a trap." Ava bristled at the charge, but she understood the mechanic's caution. "I can prove my loyalty," she responded, reaching into her purse. She pulled out a data chip and handed it to the hacker. This is all the facts I've gathered on the sickness and the government's involvement. You may verify it for yourself." The hacker grabbed the chip and placed it into her laptop. After a few minutes of typing, she looked up at Ava with a nod. "It's all here," she said. "This is good information. We can utilize this to plan our next move." The former soldier stood up. "We have a meeting tonight," he added. "You're invited to join us. But be advised, it's hazardous. If the government finds out about us, they'll stop at nothing to quiet us." Ava nodded, pleased for the invitation. She knew she was taking a risk by joining these rebels, but she felt a sense of purpose. As the gang made their way down the tunnels to the meeting spot, Ava couldn't help but feel a sense of exhilaration mixed with anxiety. She had always been a law-abiding citizen, obeying the norms and regulations of the city. But suddenly, she was moving outside of her comfort zone and joining a revolt against the same government she had vowed to serve. When they got at the meeting spot, Ava was shocked by the amount of people gathering there. It was a broad bunch, with men and women of different ages and backgrounds. Some were clothed in shabby attire, while others donned military-style gear. The former soldier who had invited Ava introduced her to the group, describing how she had exposed the government's role in the disease. There were murmurs of approbation from the group, and Ava felt a sense of satisfaction at having won their trust. The conference was hectic, with individuals shouting and debating alternative plans for pulling down the administration. Ava listened closely, trying to gather as much information as she could. She was impressed by the degree of coordination and strategy that went into the insurrection. As the conference drew to a conclusion, the gathering began to disperse. The former soldier drew Ava aside. "You did well tonight," he remarked. "You've earned your position with us. But remember, this is perilous employment. We need to be careful, and we need to watch our backs." Ava nodded, enjoying an overwhelming feeling of solidarity with the group. She had found a new purpose in life, one that extended beyond merely treating patients at the hospital. She was part of something greater today, something that may influence the trajectory of the city's destiny. As she made her way back to the hospital, Ava couldn't help but worry what the future held for her and her new rebel comrades. She knew there would be trials ahead, and dangers hiding around every turn. But she also understood that she had joined a new family, individuals who shared her passion for justice and freedom. For the first time in a long time, Ava felt a feeling of hope for the future of the city. And with that optimism came a commitment to fight, no matter what the cost. Chapter 4: The Experiment. Dr. Ava and her team of rebels waited outside the high-security government lab, prepared to break in and learn the truth behind the mystery disease that had ravaged the city. They had spent weeks gathering information and organizing their attack, but now that they were finally here, Ava couldn't help but feel a sense of anxiety. "Okay, everyone remember the plan," Ava began, her voice calm and precise. We need to go fast and softly. We don't know what type of security procedures they have in place." The gang nodded in agreement, and Ava took the lead as they snuck under the lab's outer fence and made their way towards the main building. As they neared, Ava realized that there were armed guards stationed at the door, and her heart fell. She had thought they might avoid violence, but it seemed that was no longer an option. "Stay back," Ava whispered, beckoning for her troops to take cover. "I'll take care of this." With a deep breath, Ava came out of cover and approached the guards, her hands raised out in a sign of surrender. "Excuse me," she murmured, her voice calm and steady. "I need to talk with someone inside." "It's urgent." The guards watched her warily, but after a tense moment, they stepped aside and allowed her to pass. "Thank you," Ava replied, her heart beating in her chest. She had expected a battle, but it seemed that her calm approach had paid off. Inside the lab, Ava and her crew split up, each one seeking for any evidence that may assist them find the truth. Ava made her way to the main research section, where she spotted rows of cages packed with test participants. As she neared, she discovered that the individuals were all human, and her stomach twisted with loathing. These people had been seized without their will and used for harmful medical experiments, and Ava knew that she had to put a stop to it. She proceeded to browse through the lab's records, seeking for any information on the experiments that were being undertaken. As she went over the papers, she felt her fury building. The government had been treating these people as guinea pigs, exposing them to risky medical treatments in the name of study. Ava's team had unearthed proof that the government was exploiting the sickness as a cover to undertake human testing. They realized that they were not able to disseminate the sickness directly into the public. Therefore, they needed to force the individuals to take part in the experiment by injecting them with the virus. She saw a list of the test participants and realized that one of her own team members, Lila, was on the list. Ava's heart fell. She couldn't believe that Lila had been abducted without her will and exploited as a test subject. Ava realized that they needed to demolish the facility and stop the government from performing any further experiments. She signaled to her crew, and they proceeded to arrange explosive charges across the lab. As they worked, Ava couldn't help but think of the individuals who had been exploited in these studies. She felt a feeling of obligation to do everything she could to reveal the truth and bring those guilty to justice. Finally, the charges were placed, and Ava and her crew made their way outside, watching as the lab burst in a spray of sparks and flames. "That's it," Ava murmured, her voice gentle. "It's over." But she realized that it wasn't really over. The government would not take kindly to their attack on the lab, and Ava and her crew would need to be prepared for whatever reprisal could come next. Chapter 5: The Cure. Dr. Ava stood before the makeshift lab, inspecting the bottles of blue liquid before her. She had spent weeks in ceaseless quest of a cure for the plague that had destroyed the city, and now, finally, she held the remedy in her hands. But the weight of duty rested heavy upon her. This treatment provided a possibility to save innumerable lives, and yet, it was unproven. She could not risk the potential of side effects, of unforeseen consequences. Her squad of rebels turned to her for leadership, their eyes filled with a combination of hope and trepidation. "What do we do now, Dr. Ava?" one of them said. "We must test it first," she said, her voice firm. "We cannot distribute it until we know it is safe." The staff worked fast and effectively, prepping the lab equipment and extracting samples of the contaminated blood. Dr. Ava calculated out the correct quantity of the remedy, injected it into the sample, and waited with bated breath as the blue liquid did its magic. Slowly, invisibly at first, the infected blood cells began to alter. They were no longer infected with the virus that had caused so much agony and death. Dr. Ava let out a sigh of relief. The remedy had worked. But the labor was far from over. They would need to test the remedy on a wider scale, spread it around the city, and monitor its effects. Over the following several days, Dr. Ava and her staff worked feverishly to prepare the remedy for widespread distribution. They set up clinics across the city, where the ill and the desperate would come for hope and healing. The lines of people were unending, going on and on for what seemed like kilometers. Dr. Ava delivered the remedy, answered questions, and listened to the stories of individuals who had endured so much. Through it all, she was struck by the persistence of the human spirit, by the fortitude and resolve of individuals who refused to give up hope. She's seen the finest and the worst of people, the selflessness and the greed, the compassion and the cruelty. And yet, despite the tremendous odds, the treatment worked. The lines got shorter, the number of afflicted cases reduced. The city was on the path to recovery. Dr. Ava could not help but feel a sense of satisfaction and success. She had always recognized the power of medicine, but this event had taught her its complete potential. It had showed her that one person, working along with others, could make a difference. As she packed up the lab equipment and prepared to leave the improvised clinic for the last time, she was accosted by a group of locals. "Thank you," they whispered, tears in their eyes. "Thank you for everything." Dr. Ava grinned, feeling a sense of contentment and accomplishment sweep over her. She understood that the road ahead would be long and tough, but for now, at this moment, she was pleased to relish their achievement. We hope you enjoyed this riveting tale of hope and healing in a world of uncertainty. If you want to explore more thrilling stories like this, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and join our Midnight Murmurs community. We're always on the lookout for the best science fiction, fantasy, and horror stories to keep you on the edge of your seat. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.